Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Legion of War, and it's from the publisher Eclectic Nerds. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page to find out more information than I could possibly tell you here. To do that, all you gotta do is click on the link in the top corner of your screen or down in the description section underneath this video. Go there, find out more info, and hopefully consider backing the project. Now, Legion of War is a strategy collectible card game. So there will be like preset decks and things like that, but also booster packs in order to get more cards to enhance your deck and build new decks, things like that. So you're going to build a deck ahead of time and then take it and play it against either one opponent or multiple opponents as well. And what the theme of the game is that it's sort of like an alternate futuristic type Earth where there are different warring countries and mercenary armies and military industrial complexes fighting against each other, that type of thing. So you're going to have a charismatic leader who is leading all of these forces, and the forces cards themselves representing high tech ground, air, and naval forces, and also all the different types of things that you would also need, like the territories producing resources to feed your army, both literally feed and metaphorically feed your army. And also weapons of mass destruction, intel for your espionage missions, things in different weather patterns, things like that. You need to pit these against your opponent and try to take out their leader before they can take out yours. Of course, it's a little more complicated than that, so let's go ahead and take a look at how the game plays with a prototype copy of some of the cards in the game. So just do bear in mind that what you see here may change in the final version, and of course there's going to be lots of high quality card art for all the different cards. I only have some of them to show off here, but that's why you should go to the Kickstarter page to find out more information and see more examples of that. But this will give you a good idea of how the game plays. Then we're going to come back and discuss it further. Legion of War is a competitive, collectible strategy card game for 2 or more players. Each player commands a military legion engaged in brutal worldwide war against their opponent. In order to win, you must defeat your opponent's leader before they can defeat yours. This is easier said than done, as in order to attack someone's leader, you must either destroy their territories, deplete their morale, or force them to run out of their arsenal. If you're the only player with a leader remaining, you win the game. Since this is a collectible card game, the most important thing to do before you actually sit down to play is build your deck. The cards you'll need to build your deck will be available through starter sets and booster packs. Each deck must have 65 total cards. One of those cards is your leader, which you'll leave face up in your play area known as your war zone, right next to exactly 4 territory cards that you'll choose. The other 60 cards you choose comprise your main deck known as your arsenal, and consisting of forces, buildings, WMDs, intel, morale, and weather. You can only have 4 copies of any unique card in your arsenal. Once each player has built their deck and set up their war zone, they'll shuffle the deck and draw 8 cards as their starting hand, which you'll keep to yourself. You should also set up the different stacks of product cards, which provide resources when you're able to acquire them: generic, food, power, fuel, and equipment. Before we go any further, let's discuss the activation costs of cards. Bringing cards into play or activating certain card text abilities will often require you to do 2 things: spend resources and wait a certain number of turns. The card will indicate which specific resources you need, but the white star symbol means generic, and you can use any resource to cover that. If you don't have the other specific resources, you can use any 2 resources as one specific one that you need. When you commit to activating a card, you must place the resources underneath it, then flip the card over to indicate that it is waiting the required number of turns. You can use dice or pen and paper to keep track of these turns. When the required number of turns passes, the card activates, it's flipped over, and the resources are returned to their piles. Note that some cards will not require resources, but will still require a certain number of turns to pass. This is called putting a card with your legion, and a few cards don't need either of these things. Let's also talk about the different card types before we discuss the gameplay. Your leader not only represents your capacity to win and survive, but also has powerful abilities and provides your starting morale total, which will be adjusted as the game continues. Leaders will also have 2 powerful abilities that require them to be flipped over and for the indicated number of turns to pass. They don't have attack power, but they do have health points that you'll need to protect. Territories will give you 1 or 2 specific product cards every turn, which will be placed under the territory card itself. They also have health points because they can be attacked, and if they're destroyed, you will lose morale points as indicated, in addition to any product cards still underneath them. Some territories also have their own unique abilities. Forces are your troops, used to attack your opponent's territories, buildings, and leaders, and to defend against your opponent's forces. They have attack and health points, unique special abilities, and subtypes like ground forces, navy, and air, which is important for combat. Buildings are stationary units like your territories and give you bonuses to things like morale, intel, and attack power. They can be attacked and lose health just like territories, and a rare few of them can actually attack or defend against your opponent. Weapons of Mass Destruction, or WMDs, are extremely powerful one-shot cards that can be difficult to bring into play, but often have devastating effects on your opponent, like destroying whole territories or giving huge boosts to your army. Intel cards are utility cards that can give you an advantage, often having to do with your arsenal deck and your hand, but in order to use them you must either have the most intel points or be less than 6 points behind whoever does have the most intel. Intel can be gained by other cards like buildings. Morale cards either increase your morale or allow you to spend some of it for powerful effects, but remember, if your morale runs out, your leader becomes vulnerable to attack. Lastly, weather cards are played between each player's war zone and affect everyone, usually penalizing or giving a bonus to certain cards or actions. A played weather card will stay in play until the start of that player's next turn, but there can only be one weather card in play at a time, and if an opponent plays one on their intervening turn, it replaces the existing weather card and forces it to be discarded. When you've set up your play area and drawn your cards, randomly decide who will go first. Then the players will alternate turns. If there's more than 2 players, you'll go in clockwise order. Each player's turn can be broken down into 5 basic steps. The first thing you do is draw a card from your arsenal unless it's the first turn. Also, if you have a weather card in play from your previous turn, you'll discard it right before you draw. If you have no cards left in your deck, you can still take your turn as normal, but now your leader is vulnerable to attack if they weren't already. The second step is reducing the timers on all cards that are ticking down unless it's the first turn. If it's the last tick, you flip the card back over, return the committed product cards to their piles, if any, then read and apply any effects on the cards that may occur. The third step is producing products. Any card, usually territories, that produces resources will have the appropriate product cards shoved underneath them now. You don't need to use these right away, but if the producing card is destroyed, so are any product cards that are still underneath it. The fourth step is primary actions. You can use any cards and card actions that are ready, or play new cards from hand, so long as you have the resources, and so long as you take into account the required number of turns you have to wait after you play them. Finally, if you have a forces card or special building that is ready, you can make an attack. You can attack specific territories, buildings, or even your opponent's leader, but you can only do that if you've destroyed all their territories, their morale is 0, or if they have no cards left in their arsenal. However, your opponent is free to block your attackers with their own forces and some special buildings if they have the right type of unit. Generally speaking, barring special abilities, ground, air, and naval forces can only be blocked by the same type of unit. Attacking and blocking units deal their attack points in damage to each other. If a card takes more damage than its health, it's destroyed and discarded. Otherwise, the damage is only temporary. However, if a territory, building, or leader is not defended, the attacker deals its damage directly, and the damage on those cards is permanent until the target is destroyed. Use a pen and paper or multiple dice to keep track of this. If you use a unit to attack and it survives, you must flip the card around, indicating that it cannot be used to block on your opponent's turn, and it won't reset until your next turn. After this, your turn is done and it switches to your opponent. Turns will continue like this until all leaders but one are destroyed. That player, with the remaining leader, will be the winner of the game. That is Legion of War. Well, yeah, I mean, there may be a lot of collectible card games out there, and in the last 30 years or so since they really popped about. But it is very fascinating to me that Legion of War actually brings a lot of new stuff to the table, literally to the table, so to speak. In the sense that especially with how cards are activated and actually brought down to the table and put into your war zone. There's not anything I've quite seen in any other game. The whole concept of it's not just enough to have these expendable resources to use to bring them out and to use them, you also need to wait a certain number of turns, which encourages a much more long-term strategy and planning. In a lot of other collectible card games, it's just like constant act and react. And, you build a deck around a long-term strategy, but oftentimes that completely flies out the window within the first few rounds of play because everything changes dramatically once your opponent starts hitting you with their different cards. So it's just constant act and react. And there's, of course, you reacting to your opponent's strategy in this game, but because of that whole time factor of how cards have to come into play, and the fact that so many of the most powerful cards take a lot of resources to come into play, you have to plan out ahead of time. And you can't just be reckless with how you choose to, which cards you choose to bring into play in the first place, and then how you choose to either attack with them or utilize them. It's just you have to be very cautious in how you do it and plan ahead, but then be willing to make that big, bold, audacious move when you have to in the combat phase. Hand in hand with that is how you actually can win the game and how you have to keep yourself from losing the game, which is the whole concept of your leader card, which is not just a card that gives you a couple special abilities, which is something you've seen in other card games for sure, but the fact that to get to that leader is so difficult, and it must be difficult because that's how you win the game or lose the game, and that they are the backbone of your army, the head of your army, but they're also your most vulnerable part of your army. And there's 3 different conditions about how they're going to become vulnerable. And maybe it's not likely that your deck is going to run out of cards, but it's very likely that your territory is going to be destroyed. It actually doesn't seem like it's like, oh, they got a lot of hit points. They're going to be whittled down turn by turn by turn once your opponents get their armies going. And then your morale as well. That's such an interesting thing because your morale might not be as vulnerable to attack per se. It's hard for your opponent to lower your morale. But you might be tempted to lower your own morale with certain morale cards if it seems like, this bonus is really good, and maybe a good offense is the best defense. So if I can use this morale card to give my armies a boost or to bring more cards into play, maybe it's worth spending this morale now. But the more I spend, the more vulnerable and then ultimately completely vulnerable my leader will become. So there's tons of decision making in the game. And again, long-term planning, strategy, actually having a plan as to what happens if something goes wrong down the line, and having a plan to not just constantly be on the defense, but be ready to push against your opponent. And there's lots of curveballs that can come into play to sort of test your mettle on those, like things like the weather patterns that you can put into play. There's the whole aspect of the intel cards, which is really fascinating too, because it's another resource that you want to try to accumulate, and you could ignore it if you want to, but having those intel cards, which will help you fish through your deck, your arsenal for different cards, or to give more card utility in your hand, getting more cards in the hand, swapping cards out, stuff like that, can be very critical. That can be the difference between you completely stalling out and being able to get the cards that you need to keep going with whatever your strategy is. So lots of different back and forth. Attack is an important part of the game, but it's also very direct, so it's not an overwhelmingly complex thing like it tends to be in some other collectible card games where like the combat is the one thing that has like a bajillion different rules. In this game, there is a lot of different things to worry about, but it's sort of spread out, and you can't focus on one particular thing. If you only focus on those individual battles, you're sure to lose. You have to have a long-term plan with all of your other cards, including your weapons of mass destruction as well, which are huge bombs, difficult to get into play, but can be the centerpiece of your strategy as well. So if it sounds like, this is an overwhelming amount of stuff, it really actually isn't when you take it piece by piece. When you take it piece by piece, it's actually a very straightforward game. Kill the leader. Well, how are you going to do that? Use this, use this, use this. And, once you start getting into the whole deck building aspect and, actually building your own deck together with the different cards that you can collect, then that's where you really start to see the different strategies come out, and you can actually personalize your deck to whatever strategy works best for you or that you just like the most, because, of course, the point is to have fun. So if any of that sounds like it appeals to you, if you have other people in your life, your friends, your family, people that like strategy card games and collectible card games in particular, then listen. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go to the official Kickstarter project page and find out more information by clicking on the link in the top corner of your screen or down in the description section underneath this video. That is Legion of War from the publisher Eclectic Nerds. Thank you so much for watching, and as always for supporting our sponsors. Take care.